Film is still being used by filmmakers around the world, and it is beautiful. It's what we try to emulate with digital, but it's much more expensive. But as long as film stock is being made, these filmmakers will still use it. For me though, it's digital all the way. It's way cheaper and way more accessible. I first started using digital video cameras in the 1990s in Betacam cameras, on shoulder ENG cameras. Just a small sensor though, 2/3 inches, but it was that size sensor in a camera or similar sort of format was first used in digital cinema. And that was in a film called Once Upon a Time in Mexico by Robert Rodriguez. And I was using the Sony HEW F900. This was followed by Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Absolutely not my favourite Star Wars film. And no, it wasn't Phantom Menace either. Of course, it was Empire Strikes Back. There's only really been 3 true Star Wars films made. From then on, digital filmmaking really took hold, and while lots of cameras were released, it wasn't until Red came along with the Red one that things really started to change. Here was the first 4K digital cinema camera with features required to mimic 35mm film with a wide dynamic range. The next major change wasn't to do with the film industry, it was actually the news world, where I came from. It was from a request to camera companies for them to include a way for photographers to actually record video on their DSLRs. The first one to come along was the Nikon D90. I did buy it, it was in October 2008. I think I shot one thing with it, one little piece. It wasn't very good. It was fun to experiment with. It was a great stills camera, but for video, not so good. And it was just about a month or so later that a camera came out that really changed everything, and that's the Canon 5D Mark II. This truly revolutionized the video making world. I didn't buy the 5D Mark II when it came out. I actually was kind of put off by the Nikon D90. I just didn't like what I was getting, and also the 5D Mark II only shot in 30p and I needed 25p, and we'll get on to what that means in a bit. And also there was no manual control, so it sounded like a real problem for me. And it wasn't until Zacuto actually loaned me the camera in May 2009, and I took it away with me to Hawaii, where I was doing a job for a company out there in Kauai, and I was filming with a much larger rig to get that sort of look. It wasn't using DSLR, I was using a different camera and a different setup, much more complicated and heavy and big. And we were trekking all around the island. I got some really nice stuff, but I came back really exhausted one night and saw the 5D Mark III on the table and decided to shoot a little bit with it just in the apartment, and looked at the images and went, wow, that's actually really nice. And I was actually shooting 30p on this project, and using Nikon lenses with a Canon adapter, a flange adapter, I was able to have manual control with the iris, and actually the results were beautiful, and I was completely hooked at that point. So what was it about this camera that was so revolutionary? Well, for starters, the frame size. You know, we talked about film before, and that's Super 35, motion picture being that size image, but because it's a photographic camera, a stills camera, DSLR, but a 35mm version of it, it had a larger size of the sensor, larger than Super 35. This gave us the ability to have a truly shallow depth of field, and actually also gave us a chance to film in much lower light conditions. Part of what made shooting with this affordable wasn't just the price of the body, it was the fact that the lenses used were of course photographic lenses, way cheaper than cinema lenses, which cost tens of thousands of dollars. Instead you get lenses for under $1,000. Of course you get some which are higher than that, but it made things much more affordable and much more accessible to filmmakers all around the world. What do we mean when we talk about shallow depth of field? Well, it's the amount in the image that is in focus. So right now Julian is on a wide-ish lens, and it is a medium depth of field. It's not that shallow, but the background is knocked out. Sarah is on a longer lens, and you can see the background is much more blurred. They both have the same f-stop of f2.8, and there's a number of factors which are going to affect your depth of field, which can make it more shallow. The focal length is a big factor. Longer lens means it will be more shallow, but it's also the distance of that lens to the person or object that is in frame, and them to the background. The other thing is how large the sensor is. The larger the sensor, the more shallow you'll be able to get. But what do you use this for? Well, in a frame, it's used to draw attention to something. If you have a big wide depth of field, I am centrally framed, it's pretty obvious you want to look at me. But if it's a busy frame, you have a shallow depth of field to draw the viewer's attention to something within it. That's kind of what we use it for. It also is really quite nice, and it can be less distracting. You look at Sarah's shot and you cannot see what the background is at all. It's very generic. But Julian's shot, you can see clearly there's stuff around here. It is a lounge. It depends what you're after. The 5D Mark II did have some issues. Coming from a video cameras have professional connections for the monitors, and then also one of the key things is audio. We're going to be talking about audio throughout the series. Again, every single episode will have audio in it. Audio on the 5D Mark II was just awful. Tiny microphone on the front, the quality was just really bad. It does have a mic input, but the way that it amplifies the sound, so the way a microphone works, it sends a low voltage signal into a device, and that device needs to amplify it up. And the quality of the amps, the preamps within the 5D Mark II, really poor. So you had to turn up the volume all the way to the top, and you got some hiss and noise. It wasn't very good, and you couldn't really monitor it very well. Just not a great way of recording sound. So we started using external recorders for audio. It just became a bit cumbersome, but we put up with it because we loved that image. There are a number of other issues. This is a DSLR, it's not a video camera, it's not designed for that. It's designed to be held and using the viewfinder, but because it's a mirrored camera, a DSLR, you cannot use that viewfinder. You have to use a rear screen, which is not easy, but it doesn't matter because that's why all those manufacturers came along to make rigs and accessories to make this camera work. Whilst we put up with these frustrations, of course, we'd rather not have them. So when video cameras came along with large sensors, this was the best of both worlds. The one key thing though is the video cameras didn't have sensors as large as the 5D Mark II. They were Super 35, like movie cameras. With the advent of large sensor video cameras, did that kill off shooting video on the DSLRs and now mirrorless cameras? No, not at all. The size is really key, and also full frame. Having full frame is really important, and to give us that magic look that we fell in love with the 5D Mark II. We don't always want to have deep depth of field. We do want to have a wide depth of field and a nice wide lens. Action cameras, things like that, drones. We still want to have high quality images. It doesn't always have to be shallow. What about the settings? This is going to be the really interesting part of this episode. I'm going to explain everything you need to know